Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin in Africa show. We are the voice for Bitcoin in Africa. I'm your host, Charlene Fadirepo. Today we will be speaking to Togolese human rights activist and the convener of the Africa Bitcoin Conference, Farida Nabourema. Let's get started. Good afternoon to those joining us from the United States, and good evening to those joining us from every country across the beautiful continent of Africa. This is the Bitcoin in Africa show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm your host, Charlene Fadirepo. The Bitcoin in Africa show, we are the voice for Bitcoin across every country in Africa. Today is Wednesday, October 12th, 2020. Bitcoin's price is pretty low. Wow, $19,114. As we've seen, we continue to see a little bit of a drop in price. But as we always say on this show, Bitcoin is still on sale. It's a fantastic opportunity for you to continue to stack your Satoshis. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the Bitcoin in Africa show. The Bitcoin in Africa show is the voice for Bitcoin in Africa. Our mission and vision is clear. We have been working hard to expand the narrative of Bitcoin in Africa. Our job is to give voice to the innovators, the founders, the ecosystem builders that are driving this amazing Bitcoin revolution that's happening in Africa. If you have been with us for the course of the year, you know we have spoke to so many people. We originally were called the Bitcoin in Nigeria show, but we were blown away about the amazing innovators that are happening in every country in Africa. So we had to expand the mandate of our show to include every country across the continent. Now, before we get into our discussion, as we always do on our show, I tell you a little bit about my background. I'm Charlene Fadirepo. I'm a career banker. I'm a former U.S. regulator and also a Bitcoin advocate. I work full-time to help individuals and institutions plan for their future with Bitcoin. I run a company called Mango Digital Strategies. I've written a couple books on Bitcoin. And particularly if you're interested in Bitcoin in the community of the municipality area, you might consider a book called Bitcoin in the American Dream. We are actively using that book to help get elected leaders across the United States on board with Bitcoin. And if you have a family, you might consider, I have a children's book called Sade Satoshis. And so hopefully if you are a Bitcoiner, hopefully you are preparing yourself to share your Bitcoin knowledge with your family, because what good is it if you have all of this knowledge and you can't share it with the next generation? Now, we have a fantastic show for you today. And as for the format, we are going to be spending all of our time with our very special guest, who is Togolese human rights activist, Farida Nabourema. And of course, we will be leaving a couple of minutes toward the end. And if you're going to join us live on Twitter Spaces, you will have the opportunity to ask Farida questions about all the amazing things that she's done in both Bitcoin, in both her democracy work in Togo. She has just an incredible body of work, both on the human rights and democracy side, but also as an advocate and activist for Bitcoin and the potential impact of Bitcoin in Africa. So let's hear about Farida. So Farida Nabourema is a social activist and writer who recently emerged as the unequivocal voice of Togo's pre-democracy movement. She has been a fearless advocate for democracy and human rights in Togo since she was a teenager. Through hundreds of articles written on her blog and other sites, she denounces corruption, dictatorships, and has promoted a progressive form of Pan-Africanism. She is also an internationally known Bitcoin advocate and has spoken at numerous Bitcoin conferences, which include Bitcoin 2022, the Oslo Freedom Forum, and many other podcasts and other events. But what is probably most exciting is that Farida is the convener of the Africa Bitcoin Conference, which is the first Bitcoin conference that is happening on the continent of Africa coming up this December of this year. And so this conference is going to be amazing. And we're going to spend some time talking about all the wonderful things that Farida and her team has planned for the conference. Please welcome to the show, Farida. Welcome to the Bitcoin in Africa show, Farida.
much, Charlene, for the very warm welcome and introduction. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So to start is we read your very impressive bio, but I always love to start with my guests by hearing their Bitcoin story in their own words. So if you could kind of tell us, how did you land on Bitcoin, and tell me how Bitcoin has changed work that you do to promote democracy and anti-corruption in Togo.
So, I've been an activist fighting against authoritarianism in my country, Togo, for a very long time. Togo, for those who are not very much aware, is a French-speaking country in West Africa, right next to Ghana, between Ghana and Benin. And our country is ruled by the oldest military regime in Africa. We have had the same family in power for the past 55 years. And what we have known under that regime is brutal dictatorship. And my father before me was an activist. My grandfather before him was also an activist, all fighting against French colonialism and then subsequently against the military regime that was imposed on Togo by the French colonial powers. So in part of the work that I was doing as an activist, I launched the Four Must Go movement in Togo in 2011 with the goal of bringing down the military regime of Togo. Faure Simbe is the name of the current head of state. He took over by coup in 2005 when his father died. His father ruled Togo for 38 years in blood. And he also took over in blood because when he became president, the Togolese took the street and protested against it. And over 500 Togolese citizens were reportedly killed, according to United Nations investigations. But the numbers are at least twice that. So it was a very brutal era of our lifetime. I was 15 when this happened, but the feeling of powerlessness pushed me to want to do something about it. And a couple of years down the line, when I became a university student with a couple of friends, we decided to organize and to launch the Four Must Go movement. And while doing that work and trying to raise awareness on human rights violation in Togo, trying to inspire Togolese youth about fighting for their destiny and not giving up on freedom, we eventually managed to see some results when in 2017, Togolese political party called for the reinstatement of term limits in our constitution during a protest, and some protesters were killed. So those of us who are social movement activists came up and said, this must be the last time that the government shoots protesters and goes scot-free. So we decided to call for massive protests in the country to be done with that type of violence once and for all. And the protest became massive with over 1 million people in the street. And Togo is a country of 8 million people. That was a huge number. The whole of Togo was protesting. In 14 cities simultaneously, there were protests taking place. There were protests recorded in a total of 37 or 38 countries in the diaspora. The Togolese were protesting in South Korea, in Brazil, in Canada, in Germany, in India, in places that we didn't even know at first we had a diaspora in. In that period, the government unleashed massive repression against us. And by massive repression, I mean the arrest of organizers and activists, the killing of protesters, even children as well. And that level of repression led many to exile, including myself, because at first I was back in Togo for a while, and then I had to leave again when things got very sour. But while we were organizing to find solutions to keep the protests going, but to also put pressure on the regime so that they can eventually leave power, we were trying to identify some of the tactics they were using to crush the protests and to weaken the movement. And two of those tactics were digital surveillance, which they unleashed in the country, because many of the organizers that they arrested, they managed to find out about their whereabouts by tracking them on their mobile devices or by listening to their conversations via WhatsApp groups. And then for some of them, they arrested them by tracking money that they received or sent to protesters or to social justice movements. There were some people who were arrested simply because they sent money to help people in the protests, and the government tied that against them, and the charge against them was literally financing what they are calling a rebellion against the state. So we ended up having hundreds of people in prison. Unfortunately, many of them are still in prison. They've been in prison for the past 5, 6 years with no trial, living in horrible conditions. And eventually, the movement died. The movement died because the repression outweighed our resistance. And at some points, there were some mistakes that were made by trusting older opposition leaders who eventually, unfortunately, made the wrong decisions and the wrong strategic move, which killed the protest. But as an activist who has been fighting for many years to see that moment happen, a moment where we can see millions, hundreds of thousands of Togolese people on the street demanding change, those periods of protest, which lasted over a year from 2017 all the way to early 2019, was an eye-opener on two things. Number one, it made me realize that the people of Togo are ready for change and they were ready to fight for it. Because for all this period we were fighting, all of the resources were raised locally, like literally money from the Togolese community in Togo and the diaspora. There was not a single international organizations bankrolling our protest. It was genuine. People were donating everything they could. I even had some Togolese people reach out to me and said, I don't have much to donate for the protest, but I have land. Just take the land, and if you can sell it to fund the protest, let's do that and be done. People were willing to make enormous sacrifices, from hosting activists who are on the way, when people are injured, to mobilizing money to bury those who get killed. I saw an immense level of solidarity. But then I also felt like our revolution wasn't televised. We didn't get as much attention as countries like Iran get, for example, probably because Togo doesn't have oil, Togo doesn't have gold, and Togo is not a strategic threat for any world power. So I took it upon myself to ensure that the world knows what's happening in my country, understand that for over 50 years we have been fighting for change, that we got to a point where we are ready to fight and to die for our country, but unfortunately we just need more push. But in that effort, I started looking for alternative to keep the protests going, or to the point where if we have to go back to protesting one day, because I know we will go back on the streets one day. It could happen tomorrow, or it could happen in 1 or 2 years, or even 5 years. But if we go back on the streets, we don't want to make the same mistakes we made, or we want to make sure that the government isn't able to hurt us as much as they were able to, or we find alternatives to ways what they were using to control us. During the protest, they shut down the internet. At some point, there was no possibility to communicate in Togo via internet. We went as far as hiring tech developers to build a platform for us that we could use to communicate without internet. We were trying to find solutions. At some point, we had hackers who were bringing down government website on a daily basis. We say, we give you an ultimatum: for each day that you don't restore the internet, we are going to take one of your websites down. And the day they brought back the internet was the day we took down the website of the national television. Because for us, if the people of Togo could not access information outside, they don't get to broadcast their lies to the world. So it has to be, there has to be some form of retaliation. So for me, as an activist from the younger generation, we believe that technology is a powerful tool for change. We have used technology to organize from day one. And even though the government finds ways to close access and to limit our access to these technologies, we are trying to find ways around it. So one of the other things we did was to provide digital security training for activists and journalists in Togo, so they understand how their phones or their computers could be infiltrated and could be tapped into by the government, what they could share online, what are the safest way to share certain documents. Because one of the civil society leaders went to prison simply because he wrote a report on the number of people who were killed during the protest, and he was given 18 months jail time, and he served the whole 18 months just because he sent that report by email and they were able to track it. So providing alternatives to organize safely. And in that moment now, how do we send money anonymously in a way that the government will not send people to jail because they received or sent money became a big question. And that's how I found myself getting involved into Bitcoin. So at first it was a moment of despair. We just needed to find tools that will keep us going. Then we started using Bitcoin as an alternative for us to be able to raise funds, but to send money to support people who are even in jail at the moment that everybody has no access to. Some of them have been in jail for 3 years at a time, and not even family members could visit them or see them. And they were in very difficult conditions. So when we have people who get those information to us, how do we help them without putting their lives at risk, without further worsening the conditions for them, became a very important thing to do. So Bitcoin for us at first was a tool of resistance. It was a tool of survival, nothing else. But then eventually I got curious about it. Because I started discussing it with other activists from other countries to teach them about it. And many had were a bit worried about it because there's so many negative connotations with the word Bitcoin, and they think it is a dangerous thing to use, or it's money for criminals, or it's money, dark money, etc. So I needed to build arguments to be able to explain to them that it is not what you think it is. And while doing that research, I realized that there was so much about it that I myself didn't understand at first. And there was a moment I was reading and taking a course one day, building my knowledge about Bitcoin. I actually went all the way from the beginning. Like, I'm someone who has absolutely zero background in math. I hated math in high school, unfortunately, and I went all the way back to studying cryptography. And while I was studying cryptography and I was taking a course on cryptography, I had my pen in my hand, and then I just like paused. I'm like, can you imagine this regime managed to make me like math?
Math is free.
And the one thing that I would swear that I would never enjoy. You said?
What year was that? When did you kind of start your journey to really try to dig into understanding Bitcoin and the cryptography?
That was 2019. What was 2019? It was 2019. So I started learning about cryptography, understanding the language. Then after that, I moved on to understand how Bitcoin is mined, to how the economy, the circular economy works. Then at that moment also, I paused and I was like, for the first time in my life, I understand how money works. It made me realize that all of the currencies that I've used my entire life, nobody really sat me down and told me this is how it works. It's just like, this is money, just go and spend it. And I still have that conversation with people today when they say, I don't like Bitcoin because I don't understand how it works. I'm like, do you understand how the dollar works? And they can't explain how the dollar works either. And the moment you understand how money works, you realize that for so long you have been scammed. And the resistance in my country, Togo, has one very powerful aspect. The first president of Togo, Sylvanus Olympio, was killed in 1963. It was the very first time that an African president was assassinated in a coup. And he was killed for a very simple reason. After our independence in 1960, he wanted Togo to create its own currency. And on December 12, 1962, the Togolese parliament introduced a bill to launch the creation of the franc Togolais, which will be our national currency. Exactly a month after that, on the night of January 12, 1963 to January 13, 1963, the French colonial government sent former soldiers of the colonial army to kill him in his house, exactly 1 month after that. He was a brilliant economist, He spoke 6 languages fluently. He had a degree in economics from the London School of Economics. He has a degree in law from American University, a strong Pan-Africanist, but they killed him simply because he wanted us to have our own currency. That was the beginning of our doom in that country. And this is an independence that people spent years fighting for, people got tortured for, people got killed for. The independence struggle in Togo was a very brutal struggle with tens of thousands of people massacred in the process. So we have been fighting for all these decades because of our interest in just having our own money. That was the beginning of our struggle. And we have found ourselves being ruled by one of the most brutal military regime that has ever existed on the surface of this planet, simply because as a people, we wanted our monetary independence. So the struggle against the CFA currency, which the French have imposed on all their former colonies, including Togo, has always been part of our struggle. It has always been a call for resistance, a reminder of why we need to keep fighting. Then, when I understood the philosophy, the liberating philosophy of Bitcoin, then it no longer was a tool for resistance, it became the resistance. It became the whole idea of liberation. Then it makes me realize that we don't have to wait for another 50 years hoping that one day we'll defeat the regime before we print our own money. And if we succeed, just like they did in Guinea, the French can still print fake money and mess up our economy and bring it down. Or the World Bank and the IMF can also impose loan on us and force us to repay in amounts that we can't pay back, and we face high deflation of our currency. There are so many other factors that make it impossible for former African colonies to breed, to be economically independent. So by Bitcoin, I understood that we now have a currency for humanity, a currency that was not created specifically to subjugate a certain group of people, a currency that provides hope for citizens, regardless of their nationality, of their race, of their religion. And this is the first for us because all of the currencies we have been using since our independence were literally currencies that were created to ensure that we never get out of the cycle of poverty. The CFA currency the French have imposed has lost more than 200% of its value since its creation. On multiple occasions, we woke up one day and the French government informed us that our currency has been devaluated by 50%, which means people now, their savings has been cut off by half and their debts have doubled. This has caused massive impoverishment in our nations, with people earning very little already. Like you have an average teacher in Togo earning barely $80 a month in CFA, and then next thing you know, it's devaluated, and that money is worth $40 a month when life was already difficult at $80. I realized that with Bitcoin, we can join a movement, a global movement of people who believe in real freedom, in financial freedom, in political freedom, in ideological freedom. And that's how, for me, it became a mission to inform people about what Bitcoin is, for them to understand the opportunities it provides, for them to understand the power that it has, but also a mission to make it accessible. It is not enough to tell people Bitcoin is beautiful, but then you have to provide opportunities for them to be able to access it, regardless of where they live, no matter how well educated or how little they are educated. So that became a calling. Not that I have forgotten about my political struggle, but my political struggle is still very part of this big picture.
So that's perfect. And I feel like Bitcoin has become the protest, right? So I think this use case is the most important use case of Bitcoin at all. This is the story. This is the narrative that should lead the human rights narrative should lead for Bitcoin, because this is why Bitcoin was created. This is why Satoshi Nakamoto decided that we needed a currency that was free from government
Yeah.
control, that was permissionless. Like this is it. I mean, it's not about an investment vehicle. It's not about all these other, adoptions of Bitcoin. It's really about how can you free people and give them better options to live better lives. Period. And I think that's why I think
Absolutely.
your story is so compelling. And I think that I'm excited that you have continued to share your story with the West and other folks, because um, that application of Bitcoin isn't front and center, and it needs to be, and it's time for it to be front and center. What I love about what you said was that Bitcoin is the resistance, and you said, "Hey, one day we'll take it to the streets." But I think with the work that you're doing, Farida, you are already in the streets. Maybe the next version of your protest, you don't physically have to be in the streets at all. All you have to do is share the promise of Bitcoin, and people can, they
Mhm.
can build better lives and protect themselves from regimes that are slow to change. I think I think
Absolutely.
that's amazing. And what I'd like to do is transition, because I know we mentioned earlier that you're the convener of the first Africa Bitcoin conference, and I want you to, give our listeners an overview of the conference. What can they expect? What are you most excited about? And why should they absolutely come to Ghana in December?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Charlene. The Africa Bitcoin Conference is taking place in Accra, Ghana, December 5 to 7. Accra for many reasons. First of all, Ghana is the first sub-Saharan African country that gained its independence, and its first president, Kwame Nkrumah, was someone who truly believed in the unity of Africans and African descent. So it's a very spiritual land. Number two, it's a less hostile environment, because in many other countries in West Africa, the regimes are very hostile to anything that sounds like freedom. They don't even want to hear they don't even want to see the shadow of freedom. Even though Ghana is not politically perfect, Ghana is doing far better than most countries in the surroundings as well. And then Ghana is a convening place. It has been a convening place for activists for decades, from the activists from Zimbabwe who were fighting when they were under British rule, from the activists of South Africa who were fighting against apartheid. Ghana has always been a convening land of freedom fighters, from people like Dubois, who were here and who eventually died and were buried here, to people like Frantz Fanon, who visited. So it is a land of freedom. It is the Black Star, and we think that is very symbolic. Beyond that, the reason why we are organizing this conference is the first Africa Bitcoin conference, and we want to do it differently. It's not going to look like those very common corporate events where people just go to hear about how to become billionaires. We are not against billionaires. In fact, we are having a few billionaires among us. But we believe that Bitcoin is first of all about liberation. It's about freedom, and freedom is something you cannot put money on. So we want to use this conference as an avenue to launch a movement for Bitcoin adoption in Africa. And I call it a movement because I believe it can only be driven by activists, by people who are willing to put their lives on the line for others, who are already doing that by fighting for freedom and justice and dignity in their various countries. Then, once they understand why Bitcoin is valuable, how Bitcoin works, what opportunities it provides for them to better their activism, but to also lift their people out of poverty, to provide job opportunities, to reduce inequalities, they will be interested in carrying that message. We need people who are willing to fight for Bitcoin. We need people who are willing to sacrifice for Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, when you have something that can liberate you, you have to make some sacrifices before you can get all the benefit. So it's going to be an event that has 4 tracks. The first one is Bitcoin and financial freedom. The second track is Bitcoin and lightning engineering, because at the end of the day, we are still going to need people who can build solutions to make it more accessible to everyone. Then the third track is Bitcoin and human rights, because it really fits into this work that we are doing and the narrative we are trying to promote. And the fourth one is Bitcoin and economic growth, because at the end of the day, Africa is the continent that is lagging behind in terms of economic developments because of many factors, from neocolonialism to globalization to authoritarianism and corruption. We have a lot of issues that are pushing us into the abyss, and we want Bitcoin to help reduce that. I have heard people telling me things like, Bitcoin is going to make corruption worse in Africa, ABCD. And I tell them that is a myth that we need to deconstruct. Rather, Bitcoin is going to reduce corruption if you understand how it works. Most of the corruption occurs with fiat money. Like 99% of the corruption occurs with fiat money. So technically, yes, so we need to deconstruct the myths. We need to empower citizens, and we need to provide them with tools. But we also understand that Bitcoin is money that belongs to humanity. It is not just for Africans, and so Africans need to be in a position where they are sharing their knowledge and experience with others, but they're also learning from others in terms of what they're doing, in terms of their innovations, in terms of their ideas, in terms of their successes and even their failures. So we want this event to be an opportunity for us to connect to the world, for the world to understand that there are a lot of Africans that are already strong Bitcoiners who are working to improve the network, who are pushing for adoption, and for people to understand that the Bitcoin revolution cannot take place without Africans.
Indeed, indeed. I think that's the part that I'm most excited about. I mean, there have been African founders on the ground for years developing on Bitcoin, building on Bitcoin, creating solutions that have been working well. And I think it's so important for those folks to get an opportunity to share their knowledge with the world. And so that, we all can learn. Tell me more about what is most exciting for you about the Africa Bitcoin Conference. What are you absolutely most excited about?
I think it's so hard to tell because I'm excited about so many things at the same time. For me, having the chance to let people see a different version of Africa, an Africa that is at the core of innovation, an Africa that is building solutions, is something that makes me proud. It is not something new, but it is something that hasn't been featured enough, and I really am excited about us being able to feature that. And I'm also very proud of the fact that the main organizers of the conference have been 100% Africans. We have benefited from massive support from people from all over the world, from the US, from Europe, from Asia, from the Middle East. But the organizers are Africans. Is still our event, and this is something that gives me some joy, and makes me also feel grateful that there are people who were willing to jump on the wagon and to support us in this process. And we're like, yes, we are coming, we are supporting, tell us what we can do. So yeah, that's what really makes me excited and happy.
Indeed, indeed. So I understand you guys are having a lightning hackathon. Can you tell us about the Legends of Lightning hackathon and what people can expect for that part of the event?
Yes, so we are doing a lightning hackathon. We're partnering with Bolt.fun, which is a platform that provides the opportunity for engineers to build solutions. And we have a track with the Bolt.fun hackathon on Africa Bitcoin Conference. And the goal is to have African engineers come up with ideas and solutions that can really bolster adoption on the continent, from solving issues related to human rights, to censorship, to access to payments and stuff like that. We just want people to be as innovative as possible, and we want to use at the Africa Bitcoin Conference to showcase talents, just beautiful talents on the continent.
Indeed, indeed. Now, do you want to run us through a couple of the sponsors that are going to be for the conference?
Yes, we have Paxful, which has been extremely supportive from the beginning. They are a Bitcoin exchange platform. They allow people to choose multiple payment systems that work well in Africa. Like you can send Bitcoin and choose payments like mobile money, for example, to get your Bitcoins. Some people in the US will not understand what mobile money is, but in Africa we are very familiar with that. So Paxful is one of our sponsors. We have the Human Rights Foundation that has also been very supportive from the beginning, and one of the institutions that have been promoting Bitcoin for human rights for many years. Alex Claxton has been amazing on that front. We also have Block, which is a conglomerate of companies which houses Cash App, Spiral, TDAL, TBD. I think I remember everything. The CEO of Block is Jack Dorsey. And he's also joining us at the conference. Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter. We have BitNub, which is also a Bitcoin exchange and payment system built in Nigeria. The CEO is Bernard Para. He's also joining us. The CEO of Paxful, Ray Youssef, is joining us. We have Noah, which is also an exchange platform, but that is not on the African market yet, but that is expanding in the years coming. And they have also been a great support. We have Bitrust, which is a fund set up by Jack Dorsey and ZZ to promote the education of Bitcoin and Lightning engineers. They are one of our sponsors. And we have Fedi, which is behind Fedi Mint. Fedi Mint means federated mint. And the CEO, Obi Nwosu, had this amazing idea to improve Bitcoin custody, federated custody, which will really work for communities in Africa. And they are going to be there as well. So, yeah, these are the sponsors that we have. And so far, we are really excited about everything.
Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing. I think it is definitely going to be the highlight of 2022. Guys, you absolutely have to make time in your schedule to come to the Africa Bitcoin Conference that's happening in December 5th through 7th in Accra, Ghana. And you know, I hope to see you there. I am so excited about coming, and I'm just looking forward to an amazing time to just learn and contribute and just really be a part of history. I mean, you, Farida, you all are making history. I think I just want to just take a moment and acknowledge this is the first Africa Bitcoin conference ever on the entire continent. That's amazing. I think, you know, sometimes we can be so busy and so focused. I think that you guys, you and your team, you all are making history. You are making history for Bitcoin and history for the entire continent of Africa. It is so significant. And I will tell you, you are my favorite guest of the year. And I'm very thankful and grateful that you made time to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time on the Bitcoin in Africa show. We wish you the best of luck with the Africa Bitcoin Conference. And I will see you in Ghana.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'll see you in December.